Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to yet another addition to my journey through One Piece. Today we're going to be talking about the fairly controversial Fishman Island arc. Controversial for kind of a few reasons that I've heard, some of which confuse me a little or that I disagree with, but we'll get into that. Either way, my take on it, you'll have to wait and see. It was very good, to say the least. In general, I've heard quite a few takes about post-time skip and how it's inferior to pre-time skip, according to a lot of people, and that it kind of goes off a cliff, or that Fishman Island is very disappointing in comparison to a lot of arcs, and so far, I can't say I really agree with that, but we'll get into that. Just a few things to get out of the way first, before we get into the AJPiece comments. As always, if you would like to see the next video review, which will be about Punk Hazard, the Punk Hazard arc, you can do so by heading over to Patreon and becoming a $5 patron to get early access to that. If you'd like to follow my Twitch to see me read every single chapter, you can do so by going to the link in the description and pinned comment. You can join the Discord for discussions on all things One Piece, or all sorts of other things, anime, television, video games, all that sort of thing. My streams, all that you can join the Discord for, stream schedules as well. I have recently started my Naruto read-through, so that's something I'm going through every chapter for as well, so you can follow the Discord and the Twitch for updates on that to see me continue my journey through Naruto. And last thing is that I recently did a collaboration with King Recon. A lot of you guys may know him. We did a little thing for my time skip halfway, not really, but you know, through the series Thoughts. We did a 2.5, 3-hour podcast where we talked about all sorts of things, so I'm going to link that in the description if you're interested in that. It was a ton of fun, and I think you guys might enjoy it. Now, to get into the AJPiece comments for this week, and yes, after a bit of fumbling around, I pretty much decided AJPiece comments should be at the start of the video for basically every conceivable reason. It just makes sense. And just so you guys know, these comments are about the Marineford video, so the big one. David Robb says, about what you said about Ace still dying because of his blood, one thing that I felt when watching that scene or reflecting on it later is that Luffy did in fact save Ace. Maybe he died in the end, but rather than dying as the son of Goldie Roger, he died as the brother of Luffy. Rather than being condemned and executed for the blood in his veins, he died protecting his found family. It was his choice. And in the end, isn't that what being a pirate is all about? Loving the reviews, you're a great analyst. Thank you, and that's very true, and it's something I sort of thought about after recording that Marineford video, after thinking about it more. I think you're totally spot on. You know, the fact that, I think there's nuance to it. I don't think it's one thing or the other, but you bring up a really valid point, because the fact that Ace was executed at all, or rather that he was supposed to be executed, that he was taken in and going to be executed, was for his blood. Those were shackles that he could not release himself from, and the reason he was in that situation in the first place, and the first domino that led to his eventual death, is that he was captured. So I do think there's an element of being restrained to an extent by the blood, by his bloodline, by his family, by his connection to Roger. And I think that that's a very important element to his character and to the world government and the themes of One Piece that I wouldn't want to see undercut. So I'm glad it isn't. But also, there is an element to freedom there. He did die on his own terms, having been put in that position. He died protecting Luffy, as you say. He died as Luffy's brother, not as the son of Goldie Roger. So I love that sort of dynamic there. It's dualistic. There is an element of being trapped by his blood, but also an element of making a stand himself and being his own person. It's a great mix of that. So thank you for bringing that up, that's a great point. Next is from Peter, who says, the nuance of Akainu and Blackbeard's ruthlessness and intelligence. In the name of his justice, Sakazuki destroyed Moby Dick, Whitebeard's pirates' home and their means of escape, much like he destroyed the ship full of Ohara evacuees when they were escaping from their collapsing home. As he did with Squard and Ace, Akainu always strikes when it hurts the most and tries to be as efficient as possible to indulge his illusion of a more fair world. We already saw Oda's depiction of Sakazuki as an extremely poor and likely orphan child in SBS, which is something I don't think I brought up before, but yeah. It makes you think and possibly understand why he's unable to feel empathy towards pirates and criminals. But there's also a tragic irony to it, since world government is probably what perpetuated his home to end up that way in the first place. He's unknowingly prolonging his own suffering and repeating the cycle, making children relive his pain. Kid Blackbeard appeared more similarly poor and sad in SBS. More often than directly, Oda makes his villains experience sadness, pain, and loss subtly. Without Luffy and, by causality, Shiryu, Blackbeard would have been dead from Magellan's poison. But just like for Luffy and Kobe and Marineford, fate smiled upon him despite Blackbeard clearly not being him. So if he's not him, who is he and why did Destiny still choose to protect him? In terms of the last question, I don't really know. I think I'm going to continue to let that cook. He is a kindred spirit in a lot of ways with Luffy, while diverging in tons, for all the reasons we talked about before. With regards to that, I think I'm going to just let it play out a little bit more before making any concrete theories or further speculations. But I really like all the stuff here said about Akainu. The idea of him kind of being, in a weird way, indoctrinated into perpetuating the cycle that potentially made his life so difficult and fraught with terror as a kid. Maybe because of not knowing much else, maybe because of dogma. That adds a really interesting layer to Akainu that makes me want more internalization for him. I really want to know a little bit more. I don't think it's needed to give us a full-on backstory that tells us every aspect of his character, but I definitely would be disappointed if we didn't learn a bit more about where he comes from, especially with these sorts of ideas bubbling in the background. I don't need everything, and I do like little bits of theory crafting like that. I love the subtle implications and the nuance and the subtext, but I like a little bit of text, and this comment from Peter that he so articulately puts together here really makes me thirst for more Akainu stuff. He's a really interesting character. And sort of piggybacking onto the Blackbeard stuff, just a cool little element here from Foil Enjoyer, who says, a cool parallel between Luffy and Blackbeard is the way they both recruited their swordsmen. Both were recruited while in prison, and both were recruited from a seemingly opposite side. That is a really cool detail that I made note of when I was reading through it, and I think it really speaks a lot about their ability to be this storm that a lot of people can't help but get caught up in, regardless of what your allegiances are initially. It's easy to forget that Zoro really was in an opposing quote-unquote faction to Luffy, sort of. And so him and Blackbeard being able to recruit in this specific way tells you a lot about the type of unique charisma they have. And to an extent that reminds me a little bit of Buggy as well. Low-key Pretty Bad says, one of my favorite narrative parallels in this arc starts with the line Ace says to Akainu during their clash. The name of this era is Whitebeard. The Great Pirate Era, which birthed with the death of Goldie Roger, also being the era of Whitebeard, brought to a close with his own death, was truly symbolized by the presence of Whitebeard. When he was first introduced to us, Whitebeard was on life support, symbolizing the Great Pirate Era was in its twilight years, and that a new era would come with the passing of Whitebeard, which he seemed incredibly aware of and worried at the same time to not know what the world without him would mean for his sons and his family. Whitebeard's passing on of his will that Luffy will be the one to define the next era is very telling of Luffy's character, that the man seen as Roger's greatest rival and competition would endorse him to this degree. Whitebeard adopted the Great Pirate Era and son from Roger, and made sure that under his watch it would prosper as much as it has. The name of the era truly was Whitebeard. Keep up the great work. Yeah, we talked a lot about the fact that Whitebeard sees in Luffy this new lease on life at the very end of his life, this hope for the future and the new era, that it will be prosperous for the people he cares for, and that he can exhale and be put to rest knowing that the future is in potentially very good hands. We talked a lot about that, but we didn't touch on as much the fact that Whitebeard was that sort of opposition to Goldie Roger. In a lot of ways, him and Whitebeard were sort of the spearheads of that era, and he was the last vestige, I guess you could say. Very appropriate that they were rivals, that they were adversaries to be that figurehead, to be that face for this new era. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very appropriate. And I wonder if this new era going forward will be defined by a couple of antagonistic figures. Luffy being one, maybe Blackbeard being another, maybe Buggy being another, maybe Kobe being another. Well, Kobe's not a pirate, but you know what I mean. I don't know, but that brings up a lot of interesting details about this new era and what it could represent with regards to looking at the past. Because I think with things like eras and history and looking forward in general, but in One Piece specifically, which has always had a great focus on legacy, it's important to see where things have come from, to see where things will be going, the patterns of those sorts of things, the inspirations that people get from the past, and how people tend to repeat a lot of the things that have happened in the past. So it makes me think about if this new generation could be defined by both Luffy and an antagonistic figure, just like this era I think will be defined by Roger and Whitebeard towards the end. And the last one for this video will be from Radin V1, who says, since the idea of the grayness of the conflict between the government and pirates came up, I think by this point in the story, the core of One Piece can be interpreted as a struggle between three main ideologies. The first is a chaotic and corrupt form of freedom. Many evil pirates in the story, such as Blackbeard, follow this idea. They do anything they want whenever they want, and are completely unrestricted by any rules, meaning they can step on anyone weaker than them to exercise that freedom and achieve their dreams. On the complete opposite side of this spectrum is absolute authority. This is represented by the government. While it can be seen as a necessary evil to combat the sort of people I mentioned before, we've seen time and time again through Enies Lobby, Water 7, and Sabaody that evil and selfish people like Lucci, Spandam, or the Celestial Dragons can use the inherent power imbalance created by such a system entirely for their own benefit, not to bring about justice. The third ideology that will ultimately win in the end is Luffy's idea of freedom, which is shared by all the good guys he befriends along the way as well. His idea of being free is still not to be restricted by what others will force him to do, but the difference between him and someone like Blackbeard is that he doesn't view people as pawns for him to use in order to achieve his dream, and he doesn't see himself as a force that is above anyone else. I think when you look at it through this lens, what Whitebeard says before his demise becomes much more clear. The tyranny of the world's government can't last, but the freedom that will come from it is not what Blackbeard envisions either, and that's why he isn't the true successor to Roger, but Luffy is. That's really interesting. I think that's a really cool way to sort of categorize it, and I think it's pretty accurate. I've consistently said throughout this that while I do think there's some nuance to the world government, and I think especially Marineford substantiates that through giving the Blackbeard faction or category or ideology, through displaying it in full force to show us why they're necessary. I do like that you bring up that while they are necessary, they go about things in horrific ways, because yeah, they are absolutely necessary, absolutely required in a great capacity throughout for the seas to be safe, and for civilians to feel safe alone in their beds at night. But that doesn't mean that what they're doing is all right. In fact, a lot of what they do is very, very wrong, and the system that they perpetuated is just so ripe for predatory people, like you mentioned, to use to their advantages. So those two, the Blackbeard side, the world government side, neither of them, both of them are on extremes, where you can kind of see the core of why they exist in the first place. The world government are necessary for order. People like Blackbeard just strive for freedom. You can see the core of why they exist, but they take it to very, very different extremes that make it very detrimental to the world at large. And that's where Luffy's ideology comes in. This beautiful yearning for freedom, yet not intentionally using people as pawns and being oppressive in the way that Blackbeard is. Though, of course, it's very much worth noting that what Luffy does is not perfect. He is not a hero overall. He is a hero to some, to others not so much, because he's done some bad things, especially in Impel Down. But the key distinction is that Blackbeard ultimately inspires terror, intentionally inspires terror, and uses it as a weapon, as a stepping stone for his progress. Luffy doesn't do that at all. Anyways, thank you guys very much for the AJPiece comments. Those are the ones for this video, and if you would like to have your entries used in a future video, just use the hashtag AJPiece to be entered into that pool. So here we are, Fishman Island. Oh boy. This is going to be a hefty video, I imagine. Tons of stuff to talk about, tons of insane subject matter, and awesome presentation, and cool character work, and lots of theorizing, actually. I have some theories cooking, given what we were given in Fishman Island. This has been the arc where I think I've theorized the most. At least one of them, for sure. But yeah, like I alluded to, I've seen word and talk here and there, the idea that One Piece falls off a cliff after the time skip, that the arcs are not nearly as well thought out, they aren't as potent, they are just overall just not filled with as much quality. If I'll agree with that overall remains to be seen, I suppose. We won't know until I've gotten a few post-time skip arcs under my belt, but in terms of Fishman Island specifically, which a lot of people also have told me it's one of their least favorite arcs and that it's not very good, when it comes to my perspective, Fishman Island is one of the better arcs in One Piece. I thought it was great. I thought it was thoroughly awesome. Let me know what you guys think about this whole topic, about post-time skip versus pre-time skip, if you agree, obviously, of course, with no spoilers. I'm interested to see, maybe I've just been exposed to a certain subset of opinions. Of course, there are lots of defenders for post-time skip as well, tons of them in my stream, but I've just seen a vocal amount of people say that sort of thing on Twitter, around here and there. Let me start with the sort of shallow things with regards to Fishman Island. Firstly, the art is spectacular. The art is amazing. It is one of Oda's peaks. The color version especially, to see the vibrant colors, the vibrant blues, greens, pinks, like the colors of the coral reefs, the character designs that are so colorful, and then the depth and verticality underneath the sea and the different creatures, and this is one of Oda's best works in terms of artwork for an arc. Fishman Island looks beautiful, consistently, spreads all over the place. It's awesome. I ate it all up. Another thing I loved about this is it's the first time we have the Straw Hats together for ages, especially in reality. Like, as Oda was doing these chapters weekly, it must have been something like at least a couple years, if not more, since the crew were consistently together and taking on an adventure, and I think Oda realized that and really fed into this sort of fan servicey, in a good way, moments where the crew are just interacting, bickering, fighting, loving one another, fighting together, having their moments, their spreads as they fight these enemies, just having gags, and Oda had a lot of fun with it, and I think he did it partly so we could have fun with it too. It's just awesome to see them together, just on a shallow level, to see Chopper interacting with Zoro, Usopp interacting with Nami, basically any two interactions throughout the whole thing. It's a joy. And while I wouldn't say there's prominent character work, I wouldn't say that there's any, like, Usopp or Robin material from Water 7 Enies Lobby. I wouldn't say there's, like, Nami material from Arlong Park or something like that. While there isn't anything super prominent, I think there's some really cool bits, which I'll get into, for a good portion of the characters. Namely thinking of bits for Robin, bits for Chopper, a little bit of Frankie, a little bit of Usopp. Now, in terms of what I liked in the arc, basically everything. I think all the new characters introduced are great and very contributory. I think Hody Jones is, while not one of my absolute favorite characters in the whole series, as we'll see in the rankings later, he's still nonetheless one of the most creative concepts for a character in One Piece. Maybe the most creative concept. He is a brilliant idea, and exactly what he needed to be for Fishman Island to work. And someone's kind of criticized him in my stream, saying that, you know, he works here, but he wouldn't work anywhere in a different arc. To me, that's a great strength of his. He is literally a product of this culture, this setting, and his upbringing. We'll get into it later, but overall, Hody Jones, I know some people don't like him. I don't really know why. I think he's exactly what he needs to be, and he's very cleverly written. And like I said, very creative too, very different from basically any other character in One Piece, while also feeling consistent. Maybe my favorite new character in this arc, Fisher Tiger, fantastic character. We'll get into him. Another favorite was Shirahoshi. I'm a big fan of Shirahoshi. I think she's this beautiful beacon of hope and optimism. And going along with that, King Neptune was great, Otahime was great, Fukaboshi, awesome. Just in general, great stuff. And then further fleshing out of people like Jinbei, I love the focus on Jinbei. Arlong, which is what I was waiting for this arc to do, which it did. Some great Nami moments as well. Now, there was one thing, I guess overall, that I didn't like in this arc, and it's something that I've heard a lot of people don't like, and that is the Sanji humor. It's intrusive, it isn't funny, it's just overly silly, and it takes away from a lot of scenes. The constant nosebleeds, and it just, I get it's a gag. I get it. It's fine. It's a part of his character, it's a gag, it's whatever. It's not entertaining or funny for me, and it screwed with my immersion a little bit here and there. So it's the only real flaw I'd say I have with this arc, the only significant one. And it was gone after the first third or so of the arc, so not very significant at all, but I think it's worth noting that, yeah, I agree with that. Sanji was not great in this arc. Now, speaking of the tone, I said this on actually King Recon's podcast that I mentioned earlier. I think that now that they've recontextualized Sabaody as this place of a kicking off point, this place that used to be their reminiscent and symbolic of their trauma, has now been turned into a place of empowerment and encouragement and a jumping off point and a comeback and a fight back. I think that in itself makes it feel to me like One Piece tonally post time skip. I don't think it'll ever get as dark as it did in chapters 500 to 600, where Luffy lost all his crew after the context from post-war telling us that that's the one thing he never wanted to do, people to leave him. At the absolute depths, Luffy was, until losing Ace, and then completely just breaking as a person. I don't think we'll ever get that dark again. That felt like Luffy's lowest point, and this felt like the comeback, because while he was broken, he picked up the pieces, he put himself back together, he cried, and he moved on. And I think that's what Return to Sabaodi's and post-war is all about. And so, tonally, I think that when all is said and done, we'll look at this section of One Piece post-time skip, if I had to predict, as darker than a good portion of pre-time skip arcs, but not as dark as the darkest parts of pre-time skip, if that makes sense. It just wouldn't make sense for me, because I think this is their fight back, and I think it'll end in triumph, and tonally, I think that's what Oda's going for. We'll see how it goes. Not to say that there won't be very dark stuff, of course, but overall. And while I do say that, and saying that, not to say that there won't be really dark stuff, I mean that mostly from Luffy's perspective, but also just overall, which encapsulates everything. I'm contradicting myself a little bit, because Fishman Island is extremely dark. The concepts here: discrimination, racism, deeply embedded trauma and hate, leading to people being shackled by hate, and how difficult it is to break out of that, and the importance, once again, of a third party. The themes here and how they coalesce are so beautiful. And there's this idea, once again, more powerfully here than maybe anywhere else so far, the idea of the sun. We have these people in Fishman Island reaching out for this hope, or being devastated and not seeing a hope, and that hope being indicative of the sun. It's said throughout the arc that Fishman Island is the only place at this part of the sea where the sun beams down on. And so they have this light, and the idea here is, do they look at this light as a hope or a cruel tease of something that they'll never be able to get, be able to attain? Whether someone goes on one side or the other with regards to that tells you a lot of their relationship with hope, and how they can persevere or not persevere through the toughest of times. The sun is everywhere here. There's that element of it, the sun peeking through, and how people look at that as a tease or as a hope. Otahime constantly tried to reach the sun, to grasp for the sun, thought of it as possible. Shirahoshi, one of the first things we hear from her, despite being imprisoned for most of her life, is talking to Luffy about whether he's seen the sun or not. She believes that it's possible, despite all she's been through. There are the Sun Pirates, these pirates who, the basis and core of their ideology was to strive for freedom from oppression. That is not a coincidence. The sun is everywhere. The sun represents, in a lot of ways, freedom. And who is the embodiment of freedom more than anyone else in this story? Luffy. And so, to get into some theorizing here, it comes to the idea here of Fishman Island. It is not saved, it is not destroyed, as Charlie's prediction says it might have been, and it's left up in the air as to whether it was metaphorically destroyed through the culture being, cut off, or if there's more to come. And there's the whole idea of Joy Boy and the promise involving the Ark. I think this all lends me to think that Luffy is going to be, well, I guess we're getting right into the theorizing. I think there is maybe a Joy Boy every generation, or at least there are several iterations throughout the generations of Joy Boy. And I think Roger may have been one. I'm not sure exactly, because Roger could communicate with the Sea Kings, but I think Luffy is definitely one. I think Luffy is one because it's heralded that someone will carry on Joy Boy's promise to Fishman Island later on. We also hear, take that little morsel, we also hear that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island. We also have Luffy being indicative of the sun, which a lot of people in Fishman Island yearn for, which they haven't gotten to yet. They still have this artificial sun beaming down, despite it being representative of all that I said. It all adds up, and then the arc, and Luffy being able to hear the Sea Kings, it all adds up. I think that in the future, Luffy will destroy the town, the island, I think Charlie's prediction will be correct, and lead them through the arc, embodying Joy Boy and that promise to the sun. I think it all just makes sense. I think that'll be revisited in the future. Could be a total clown. Maybe that's not what's going to happen. But to me, that fits so well. It fits so perfectly. And it fits thematically with everything said in this arc. Because it ends, and there's hope for the future, but it doesn't end definitively. It ends with the idea that we're going to get back to Fishman Island to some degree. Because there are still things that haven't been tied up. So all that stuff is really, really prominent here. I love those ideas. And they fit so well in this place that is stuck in this perpetual cycle of conditioning, like there is no hope for more, and the few people who do hope are looked at as foolish. Someone like Luffy is perfect for this, for breaking this cycle of hate, and for putting it to rest, and destroying it. And I love the idea of there being, nothing to hold on to in the past. These people want their past to be destroyed because it is only representative of their hate. They'll remember the fond times, and you can destroy and pull this up from the roots because there is very little here that's worth salvaging. But the stuff that is worth salvaging, the memory of Otahime, for example, the memory of Fisher Tiger for a bunch, you don't need the physical island of Fishman Island. You don't need these physical things to remind you of those things. I'm rambling a little bit, but all this stuff is really great. There's also the idea of inherited negative will, a sort of inverse on the idea of inherited will, inheriting, through example, hatred for the treatment that's been going on for ages. The idea of the children, the next generation, being the bigger person to get the children out of the forest, excuse the Attack on Titan reference. It's all beautifully, beautifully done. Otahime, Shirahoshi, Luffy, Jinbei, all Fisher Tiger as well, all great conveyors of this theme. And Fisher Tiger, the flaws, the very human flaws, and the shackles that bound him of hatred, and the contrast between him and people like Arlong, and him and people like Hody, and Jinbei, how he completely contrasts them. It's really great. This arc is so thematically dense and poetic, and it has so much going on. It reminds me I think of it as a tandem with Skypiea, because Skypiea is to me the most thematically potent, poetic arc, and it is also kind of contentious in the face, or in the minds of a lot of the fandom. Or I think it's been getting better lately, but it used to be. Skypiea just strikes me as the most thematically poetic and beautiful. And there are some arcs that I think I put on the thematic axis of things, some I put on the more character-focused aspect of things, some on the more setting, some on the more, plot-based, whatever. Fishman Island is very much like Skypiea in that thematic focus, and I look at them as a huge tandem. I think they're the two best arcs when it comes to being a sort of stream of consciousness and vehicle to portray these themes, the idea of the sun. And one is 20,000 feet above the ground, and another's 20,000 feet below. Those numbers might be a little bit off, but you get my meaning. The last thing, before we jump in, is that the cover stories are great. There's this kind of victory lap throughout One Piece, seeing all the places we've been so far. It's really beautiful. It goes on for like 35, 40 volumes, something like that. And I really love it, because you can see, post-time skip, glimpses of a lot of the characters we've come to know and love. I loved seeing King Cobra, who seems to be sick, and Vivi, and I love seeing Koza and Wiper and all these locales, and Kokoro, all these people we've learned about and grown to love. It's beautiful to see them reacting to the Straw Hats' triumph. But to get into the actual content, let's do it. So we start with the Straw Hats sailing off to Fishman Island, as they meant to a couple of years ago. And there's some reactions throughout Sabaody, and Shocky asks Rayleigh about, are they going to be okay, something to that extent, and Rayleigh just says, he'll be fine. I'm a big fan of his. Just beautiful continuation of the tear we saw at the end of Return to Sabaody. And he recalls his first meeting with Roger, Luffy reminding him of Roger, and Roger he was a spitting image of Luffy, which I think is very indicative. We then learn that throughout the time skip, the Marines tried to claim the Thousand Sunny, which was at Sabaody, of course. They all got separated after they weighed anchor there. But for 2 years, until Frankie was able to come back, Kuma defended it as his last mission. He made a deal with Dr. Vegapunk to install a mission into his programming, and I think this was it. His duty was to protect the ship until someone came back to claim it. That was Frankie. He met him, he saw Kuma, and Kuma said, okay, mission complete, which adds such a really interesting emotional element, human element to Kuma, and whatever his goals may be, I think we can infer them. I've talked about them before. He used the last vestiges of his life, I think, to give Luffy and crew hope, to set them up in a productive way, to give them the best chance of fighting back. And that's beautiful. That is who he really was. And it's sad that that element's been lost, apparently, according to Doflamingo. We'll see. So they are extremely grateful for him, as they should be. Then towards the end of the chapter, the first chapter, we see that the Caribou pirates, Caribou, those losers from Return to Sabaody are pursuing them. And something I love about Caribou is that he's completely dismissed. His morality is dismissed, he's a horrible person, and Oda lets you know it, and he's dismissed as a threat as well, given how much they've grown. So he's just kind of fodder, but he's pretty cleverly used fodder. Oh, and with regards to the Luffy flashback, I think the implication is that Luffy's hat was once Roger's, because he seems to be wearing a very similar one. There could be a lot to that. We get some cool science lessons from Oda, as he likes to do, about the sort of underwater currents and the mechanics going on as they make their way to Fishman Island and how it's working, and the coating and the resin. Frankie and Nami help a lot with that. Caribou tries to invade the ship, but ends up being captured by the Straw Hats, like I mentioned earlier. But we also see throughout this skirmish, Momu, the sea cow from Arlong's Pirates, and this was a precursor to, as if we needed more evidence for the idea that Arlong would be recontextualized through Fishman Island. Nice little touch, and some interesting reactions from Nami as she remembers the trauma that she suffered at the hands of Arlong. But these first few chapters are very adventurous, very sort of hijinks-esque, as they come up to a kraken. They find a kraken, and Luffy decides he wants to tame it. And so he does, and he names it Tsurume, eventually. But we go through these adventures throughout these underwater crevices, and we see this very scary deep-sea place. For anyone who doesn't know, I have thalassophobia, fear of sort of deep areas, shapes underneath you, the depths of the ocean, and so this triggered that a little bit, not as much as my recent playthrough of Outer Wilds, but I digress. So yeah, we see these like, this really nightmarish sort of spread of these creatures and these depths, and it was cool to explore that sort of thing. Someone made the reference to Kliphoth from Berserk, and I see it for sure. But the monster trio, very similarly to a former arc, the exact one is escaping me. I think it might have been Jaya. They go deep sea diving to try to tame this kraken, and it's tons of fun. Like I said, the straw hat hijinks, perfect. Throughout all this, the crew are attacked by a sea devil and saved by someone named Captain Vander Decken, who they don't really realize that he's an enemy. Neither of them really do. We'll learn more about him later. But essentially, through all these skirmishes and all this sort of chaos, the monster trio emerges, having tamed Tsurume the Kraken, and saves the Straw Hats, and they continue on their journey. And soon afterwards, they enter Fishman Island proper, but have a bit of trouble and get separated along the way, because it's sort of coated and shielded by this gigantic bubble, which isn't super permeable and causes a lot of them to be separated from one another. So they get separated into a couple of parties. And we are reintroduced to Kami. She's looking beautiful, she's doing well, and it's really cool to see her again. And we see that the people who wake up in her apartment are Luffy, Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper. More about Fishman Island is sort of explained outside of the geographics. There seems to be a hierarchy, where the higher you go in the apartment sort of district, the more rich they are, which is obviously, very in keeping with the politics of One Piece, but also of Fishman Island itself, and of the sort of top-heavy political, societal, socio-political dynamics that take root all over the place, but here as well. And that may have been learned from the oppression of their adversaries, perhaps. The idea that, I didn't mention this, but the idea of learning and wielding things that have caused you trauma to inflict pain onto others for the sake of control is a big, big element here. And I think it's subtly shown through the hierarchies and the sociopolitics and the economics of Fishman Island. That, or Oda's just saying capitalism bad. But yeah, the apartments higher up are nicer and get more light, get more of the sun and the hope that they yearn for. Very clever, the sun again. And at the end of this sort of introductory chapter to Fishman Island and the inner workings of it, we cut to this guy, the leader of the Fishman pirates, Hody Jones, who says to bring the Straw Hats to him. Like I said, very good character. Can't wait to sort of chronologically go through and explore him. From here, we get a bit of information from with Luffy's group, from their perspective, as Kami talks about what's been happening in the past 2 years with Jinbei. Jinbei got rid of his warlord status, so he had to leave. Him and the Fishman Pirates had to leave. But he was coming back, and Luffy reveals, or we learn somehow, I don't remember exactly how, that Luffy had a promise to meet him here. So he's not here yet, but they are going to meet. And at the same time, the Neptune's princes, they are trying to deliver a message to Luffy from Jinbei, the specifics about where they're going to meet. Throughout all this, there's a bit of a skirmish. Hammond confronts Luffy and co. I don't know if I mentioned Hammond before. He's not very notable, but he's a very minor antagonist here. And we get a bunch of, just like I said, the Sanji gags with his nosebleed, that continues here. It kind of encroaches its way into the story. Here, it is silly, it is pretty stupid, but it brings forth the idea of blood transfusions, which, if you've read this arc, you know is extremely important, so that is notable. Sanji and all of them are taken in by Madame Charlie, who's a really interesting character, and we learn throughout this that Luffy's grown an immunity to poison. We see Popog again. Brook comes back. We learn a lot about the royal family and the precarious sort of situation that Fishman Island's in. We get hints of Shirahoshi. We learn about Vanderdecken and how he is in love with Shirahoshi and trying to earn her hand in marriage, and as such is throwing weapons at her. Well, actually, I don't think we learn that here. We learn it later, but nonetheless, we learn about what a piece of shit he is. And we also learn that in Whitebeard's absence, the power vacuum that came up as a result of his absence was filled by someone named Big Mom, who is said to be, she's protecting the island, but what's really notable is that it's said kind of offhandedly that she is nowhere near as benevolent as Whitebeard. Whitebeard never asked for anything, but Big Mom is doing this for stuff in return. Sweets, food, specifically. And in the midst of all this, we learn from Charlie that she is this sort of fortune teller who can see all sorts of things that happen, and they have proven to happen to Fishman Island. She has, if not 100% accuracy, something really close to it. I'm pretty sure it's 100%. And she has foreseen that Luffy will destroy this island. And that's stated to be very full of doom, full of gloom, very dark. But because of the reasons we talked about earlier and the culture ingrained in Fishman Island and the fact that the past here is not something that a lot of them look back on fondly, that may not be, that may not be the most horrible thing in the world. I'm not going to belabor the point because we talked about it earlier, but this was really interesting, a really great hook for the arc going forward, and it made me think, is he going to literally destroy it? What does that mean? Because Luffy's not going to go dark or anything like that, but what's the subversion that's going to happen here? Is it going to be metaphorical? It's just lots of things were swimming throughout my mind at the same time, and they continue to after the arc because it doesn't seem to have come true. If it has, it was only metaphorical, but I feel like there's more to it, like I said before. Either way, Charlie's a really cool character, and I love the fortune-telling aspect, the fate aspect, cool element to bring into Fishman Island. We get introduced to more of the Fishman pirates who are allied with Hody Jones. I don't have much to say about them, but I find Zio very funny. He is constantly put in situations where someone else has got the upper hand on him, but he pretends that he is okay and that it's all going according to plan. It was a funny gag throughout the arc. The crew get more and more together. I think by this point they see Nami. Nami's back with them, and they're only missing a couple, Robin and Frankie, I believe, and they are introduced to King Neptune, who I didn't really know what to make of, but the more the arc went on, I liked him more and more and more, and he takes them to his palace, the Ryugu Palace, which looks beautiful. One of the most beautiful spreads in the entirety of One Piece, especially in color. The complexity in the architecture, the detail, the surroundings, the flora and fauna and marine life everywhere, the depth and just the detail. It's incredibly brought to life. And during all this, we sort of cut away to Hody Jones, who is preparing and saying that we're going to make sure that everyone knows who the kings of Fishman Island are, and we're going to drag humanity down no matter what. And we can infer what he's referring to there, knowing what we know about the Fishmen, but the later context somehow makes this hit even harder. There are some caribou shenanigans going on in the background, but as we tour the Ryugu Palace with the crew and King Neptune, I think something that's really important is that he is humanized immediately. He is scolded for being careless and not leaving guards in front of the palace, leaving it unguarded, and just kind of leaving it vulnerable, which obviously is something that a king should do, but nonetheless, I like that he's scolded here because it adds this human element to him, this vulnerability that would be important and made him more relatable and approachable. Luffy smells food and sneaks off, as he is wont to do, and in the dark, let's say, stumbles into Shirahoshi. He stumbles into this tower after smelling food, steps on some squishy things, and finds Shirahoshi. And I've said this earlier, I think Shirahoshi is a great character. She is among my favorites in this arc, probably top 3, just behind Fisher Tiger, right up there with like Hody. I think she's awesome. I think she is kind of the personification of the type of enduring hope that her mother represented, which we'll get to later, but also just very likable, very endearing, you would look at her as potentially weak from an outward perspective because of the way in which she cries at everything, similar to the way that her mother was quite frail, but she has a heart of gold and such conviction and strength. And then there's some really important exposition given here. Nami asks about sort of the logistics and geographics of Fishman Island, and how it's so bright down here despite it being so deep below the surface. And it's explained here, some of the thematics that I've talked about already, that the sun reaches down there in this specific spot. Fishmen, ages ago, noticed that there was a light beaming down on the ocean floor and gathered around it because of that light, indicative of freedom and hope. Now, this isn't direct sunlight, which is kind of key, I think, in this metaphor, because what is going on is the roots from a tree called the Sunlight Tree Eve take the light from the sun and transfer it down to Fishman Island. There's some scientific reasons behind it, but it's mostly just looked at as this sort of miraculous thing. And what I think is key here is that this isn't direct sunlight. They are able to indulge in this hope that is beaming down upon them, but they don't have the actual sun. And that is a lot of the literal and metaphorical quest here for the people of Fishman Island, for those who have hope, to reach the sun legitimately, truly, the real sun. That is Otohime's hope. That is what I think Luffy will guide them out of eventually, through being this new joy boy through the arc. I think it all has to do with that, reaching the real sun. But nonetheless, the metaphor still holds. This is the one place where the sun hits through this sort of miracle, and that means something. It means that those who choose to look at it as encouragement can strive for it. And notably, Neptune considers this sun to be a blessing that a lot of people take for granted. The thematics there are so rich. In this place of dreariness, the sun nonetheless beams down. It is there. It is there to be grasped, but it's so difficult, and sometimes you need just a little bit of a push from a literal sun in Luffy. Throughout all this, Usopp also makes note of the fact that Frankie would probably like to know about this Sunlight Tree Eve, because it must have a connection to the Atom Tree that the Thousand Sunny was built off of. We learn after this, as Luffy meets Shirahoshi, about the fact that Vander is consistently tossing weapons at her tower to try to get her to marry him, and the first thing you think of when you see someone imprisoned in the tower is potential cruelty from those who imprison her. But no, we see here that it was done for her safety, and it was probably done with a heavy heart, especially given the gift that she has, and the beautiful sort of person she is. Dekken is fine. I don't think he's a bad character. I don't think he's good either. I think he just does the job. He's a sort of embodiment of this ruthless ambition at all costs, doing whatever job you need to do to do it, while also being just heinous and a horrific person. He doesn't have a high ceiling. Hody's better by quite a lot, but, you know, he's notable. There's some confusion on the streets with a bunch of guards and arresting the Straw Hats and what's going on with Neptune, and Zoro breaks out, and it's generally entertaining, but don't have too much to say about it. But during all this, Hody Jones and Vander Dekken make an alliance. They have a mutual goal here, or a goal that intersects, and they make an alliance here to tackle the Straw Hats, to get Shirahoshi, to ultimately pound the humans into the dust and obtain this power. They want to do this, they want to take the head of Neptune, and they want to just overturn the order so that their respective goals can be accomplished. The confusion carries on. The Straw Hats have somehow tied up King Neptune. It's generally really funny hijinks, some of that fan service I was talking about that I really enjoy. Then the three princes come trying to deliver the message, and they're like, what the hell's happening? But luckily they're able to deliver the message from Jinbei to Luffy, which is, do not fight Hody Jones. Meet me at the Sea Forest, or the Forest of the Sea. And the first part of that is, you might think of it as the classic, oh, he's too strong for you, but that does feel a little bit weird because Luffy's just become so powered up. He's so much stronger. He's learned so much about hockey. It seems strange to think that Luffy wouldn't be prepared for that. So what we learn later, to jump ahead a little bit, is he does not want Luffy to fight him because of what it would mean for the embedded culture and the cycle of violence and how it would continue to perpetuate. If Luffy were to defeat him in that way, the cycle of hatred would just continue. At the same time, Luffy takes Shirahoshi, learning that her dream would be to go to the Sea Forest, having been imprisoned for forever, yet having this hope regardless. She is so great. This hope for seeing the sun. He learns that one of her wishes would be to go to the Sea Forest, so he takes her there. He hides her in Megalo, the MVP of this arc, by the way. Megalo goes through so much, and they go off to the Sea Forest, which is the same place as Jinbei, which is exciting. I love Luffy and Shirahoshi's dynamic. Luffy consistently calls her a crybaby, and eventually Wimpy Hoshi, she gets elevated or promoted a little bit. And it's, he kind of rags on her a little bit, but it's all done in a good spirit. It's all very honest, and they have a really great dynamic and she has this beautiful hope. 10 years in prison, yet one of the first things she asks Luffy about is if he's seen the sun, this hope. And Luffy feeds off of that and wants her to achieve her dreams and wants her to become stronger. And it's generally pretty beautiful. I like it a lot. He encourages her to follow her dreams as he does. So the plan goes on. Megalo almost ingesting Shirahoshi. It's a bad plan, it's a Luffy plan, but somehow it ends up working, and they break out and they go there. They're on their way. Meanwhile, Hody Jones and Vanderdecken are sort of prepping for the battle ahead. We learn about these energy steroids that they've got a great supply of, which will become very important later in terms of the plot and the ending thematics as well. But Hachi is there, and he's begging them, imploring them to not do what they're about to do. And we hear here something really interesting, which is that he cannot face Luffy. He cannot face Luffy and his crew, essentially because of guilt and shame and regret, knowing what his actions partly have brought forth. Like, imagine Nami seeing this, which she does, but he can't imagine it because of his shame. We learn that Vanderdecken's power is that whenever he touches something, it'll reach its intended target. So, in order to begin this barrage, Hody says to begin chucking humans at the castle so that they'll be able to storm the gates. And the humans are going, that's not going to work, are you kidding me? These human captives. And Hody says, this is your place. You're inferior to me. This is your job, your duty. And if you succeed, which I don't expect you to, you'll be free. If you fail, that is your rightful place to die as complete fodder. Again, using the sort of oppression that was done to his people, to humans, the cycle of hatred. It's such an insight into him. It reverses the narrative from earlier in life that he not personally experienced, but experienced by proxy. He is a reaction of a character. He is someone that could only have existed here, like we were talking about earlier, as a result of all that had gone on in history. And this is a precursor to that. His will is almost not even his own. He, as a character, is like this momentous force of nature brought forth by the suffering of his people. He was almost created through the hatred. He was almost like a vacuum for all of it, and he is dishing back the hatred that those people experienced. And of course someone like this would be created in this way. Of course. But for the way forward, it's unfair, but you need to stop this hatred, even if it means just dismissing horrific sins. Sometimes that's what has to be done. But Hody, of course, cannot do that. He is not built like that, and that's why he's the antagonist here. Anyway, Shirahoshi is very delighted to be going on this adventure to the Sea Forest, and we hear that her mother is buried there. This person who she loves so dearly. And at the same time, we cut to Jinbei, who is waiting there, who says Queen Otahime's ideals have not been forgotten. It's a great foundation for future things within the arc. And the Sea Forest looks beautiful. It is very ominous. It's sort of a graveyard of ships. It feels very lonely and haunting, but at the same time, sort of darkly beautiful, and that's where they go. Hody and Vanderdecken make their way towards Ryugu Palace, and we learn about Robin and Frankie, who have been gone for a decent portion of this arc so far. We learn where they are. Frankie, which is very lovely, is with Den, who is Tom's brother, sort of catching up, reminiscing, understanding where to go forward from here, generally just connecting with him, which is really lovely stuff for Frankie. And Robin is investigating Poneglyph stuff, Century Void stuff. She's doing her own side quests and tours and wondering if this place has the key to the Century Void. Now the fight starts to ensue between Hody and those of the palace, and Zoro confronts him, and we immediately see a big difference between Arlong and Hody. Hody has no qualms about sacrificing his own people, his Fishman comrades, for the sake of his goal. But if you remember back to Arlong Park, Arlong was enraged whenever his own people were hurt. We now know, likely because he feels this kinship with them, given their history, given the collective togetherness that he feels with his people and his kin. He would do anything to protect them, and that's the core of his motivations and why he does what he does. Obviously, he goes to extreme with it, but that is Arlong. Arlong cares for his people very deeply. Hody is just going through the motions of hatred without connections to anything. And in that way, he doesn't carry forward the will of Arlong or Fisher Tiger, or let alone Otohime. Complete opposite, but he is a bastardization of those sorts of things, kind of similar to the way that Blackbeard is a bastardization of Whitebeard. He carries forth on a shallow level what would seem to be those ideals, just like Blackbeard carries forth Whitebeard's power, but in reality they are nothing alike. Hody has this core of oppression and desire and hatred for humans, and desire for his Fishman to see the light. But the one difference is the gigantic difference that makes him totally different from Arlong, and that is because Arlong had a sentiment behind his goals. Arlong had heart. Arlong loved his people. Hody is just doing what he knows. Like I said, going through the motions. He is hardly a person. It's a bastardized, inaccurate, misinherited will. The sentiment is completely lost, even if the actions on the shallow side would seem very similar. Nami here witnesses Hody. She sees Hody and she sees his tattoo, and the trauma resurfaces. Nami isn't a huge focus in the arc, but the bits she does get are very, I think, loyal to her character, very loyal to the idea of the trauma she suffered, and very tactfully done, so I really enjoyed that. But everyone congregates at close to the Sea Forest, Coral Hill, I believe it was. Luffy, Sanji, Chopper, Hachi, Shirahoshi, Megalo's there, and they're confronted by Vanderdecken there at Coral Hill. Luffy makes pretty short work of him. Zoro seems to make short work of Hody Jones, though that didn't stick. And everyone is now, or the vast majority of our cast here, are headed towards Sea Forest. They're congregating there. Nami is with Kami, after having disappeared after seeing Hody Jones's tattoo and the trauma resurfacing. In the midst of this, Shirahoshi rejects Decken, and Luffy vows to protect her. Now, one minor, tiny, I don't know if it's a complaint, but just something I imagine would have done differently, is that in the beginning, Shirahoshi is she's a very sort of submissive personality, or maybe not submissive, maybe that's not the right word, but she's very courteous as a political figure must genuinely be a lot of the time, but she's overly polite, I think, in a lot of instances, and I think this makes sense for her character, but I would have liked to see some growth with regards to that. My only criticism for her character is that here, when she rejects Decken, she's just like, I'm sorry, you're not really my type, and that continues throughout the arc, and it doesn't really change the tone of that. I would have liked to see her more forcefully reject him, like, get the hell out of here, I don't like you. You're a ridiculous man. You're a fool. You're a joke. Something like that. I think that would have been cool for her growing confidence a little bit. I guess it may have been a little bit out of character. I don't think so. I think it could have been fit in a very cohesive way. But essentially, she's just very apologetic to Decken throughout the arc while saying, sorry, you're not my type, just consistently. I would have liked that to shift just a little bit, if I'm being a little bit picky, just to show her growing confidence. And Decken doesn't deserve any politeness at all, so it just would have been cool, just from a sort of character growth angle. But she grows regardless outside of it, so I'm just nitpicking a little bit. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Neptune, Zoro, Usopp, and Brook are taken captive by Hody, who injects himself with those energy steroids and gets a new lease on life and is able to capture them along with his pirates. Everyone else sort of congregates at the Sea Forest, and Frankie, Den and Jinbei meet with everyone else, the rest of the Straw Hats, Kami, Hachi, Shirahoshi, Megalo, and here she tears up very beautifully drawn at being able to see her mother's grave. It has been 10 years since she's been able to see her mother, let alone her grave, and all the trauma, which we'll get into, but just imagine the release of emotion at that. It's beautifully communicated, and we don't have all the context for why it's so beautiful, but Oda does, and you can see it in the illustrations here. And here, Jinbei kind of drops a bomb, as he says that he was the one who released Arlong into the world. The focus being on Nami, who obviously was so cruelly abused and mistreated for years on end by Arlong. So that is sort of an encapsulation of one of the arc's big themes here. Nami, who has been a victim of something directly done by Jinbei, will she perpetuate the cycle and hate him for that? Or will she understand after hearing his full story and break the cycle and cut it off here for productive discourse and moving forward? Obviously, Nami is an absolute gem of a person, and she understands after the story's done, and she forgives Jinbei and says it's okay, which Jinbei's incredibly grateful for. And that's kind of an encapsulation of the answer forward for Fishman Island. And it's beautiful from Nami. It's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment and moment. But I'm jumping ahead, because prior to that, Sanji says, explain what's going on, but know that I may never forgive you, Sanji tells Jinbei. And some people said they weren't quite a fan of that. I think it makes sense. I didn't really have much of a problem with Sanji telling Jinbei that Nami's someone he deeply cares about, and causing so much hurt for her. That's understandably something that would be hard to forgive for someone like Sanji. So I think that's merited. He says some things later on that are a bit strange, I think. But this right here is fine by me. I like it. It's a good Sanji moment, and it's probably the most serious we see him in the arc. And I think it's understandable and organic. But there are dark looks from Nami too, as she doesn't quite know what to make of the situation, as she struggles with this. And a lovely little detail, lovely I say, but it's horrific, it's just very well written, is that we now see, which is something I hadn't clocked until now, that Arlong Park, Arlong's domain, was modeled after Sabaody. The structure of the place was very much modeled after Sabaody. The structure, the layout, the building, it follows the shape of the place that represents such pain to them. And this is that theme again, of those who are oppressed or cruelly treated using the means that were used upon them and wielding them to feel in control and lording over others. The cycle of violence continues. The shape of Sabaody in general, served as this place of cruelty and abuse and trauma for Arlong, and so he used the exact shape of it physically to dominate over others and display that cruelty towards others, to feel in control, to feel authority, to turn from the oppressed to the oppressor, to grasp control and authority, and to turn the pain into control and authority. And most of all, to try to avoid that fear, to inflict the fear upon others, to avoid your own fear. It's beautifully done. And after this, Jinbei begins one of the best backstories in One Piece, the Fishman Island backstory about all that had went on years prior with Jinbei and Fisher Tiger and Arlong. Context for all these characters I've been dying for. I've been wanting more context for Fisher Tiger, which I've talked about before, more for Arlong, which I've talked about a lot. Jinbei, it's great stuff, and it works in a vacuum for the themes of the arc beautifully, but also enriches the overall scope and mythos of One Piece. So we start with an introduction to Fishman Island back then. We know that once the Great Pirate Age began, havoc was wreaked across Fishman Island. Again, some gray, some flaws, I guess you could say, as a trickling byproduct of Roger's reign, or Roger ushering in this emboldenment for these horrible pirates, lots of horrible pirates. Whitebeard saved them, but racism still endured throughout. People still referred to them as fish. It felt futile. Their search for freedom was very difficult and, yeah, like I said, futile. It felt futile for those who tried to search for it. But Queen Otohime was an exception. Queen Otohime is the one who reached out for the sun, and continued to hope for togetherness and connections between fishmen and humans. She wanted to make peace with humans, but the fishmen, understandably, due to their hate of the mistreatment that they've experienced, constantly tried to scupper her efforts. And we're reminded that Fisher Tiger stormed Marijoa around this time, freed the slaves, and formed the Sun Pirates, who would search for that hope. Sun Pirates. but would go about it in a way different to Otohime, and in a way that didn't necessarily bring forth that hope. Nonetheless, the sentiment was very much the same, which I find really interesting. But Jinbei, Arlong, Hachi, they were all part of the Sun Pirates. So, seeing the flashback in earnest, we see the plight of many on Fishman Island. We see Jinbei, the old Fishman pirate crew, Fisher Tiger, Hachi, Arlong, the problems they have with humans, the things they had to deal with. We see Otohime going throughout the streets trying to gather these petitions for people, getting sort of the populace's permission and vote almost to try to reconciliate with humans, which is really beautiful because if you think about it, that's not really necessary. The leaders of this place, I don't believe they need the blessing of the populace. She could just do it if she wanted, but she wants to make sure that people are okay with that. She wants it to be a democratic, approved decision by everyone involved. And so what she's trying to do is get a petition signed so that they can go to the reverie, this meeting of all the world's leaders, or something equivalent to that, to bring it forth and get something sorted out there. And there's a lot of emphasis on this reverie. I have heard of it. Actually, I would be lying if I haven't. I know that a bunch of One Piece YouTubers get together to talk at this event called The Reverie, where they theorize or discuss things and stuff like that. So I knew of its existence, but I didn't know exactly what it is. Makes sense now that I see this context. But again, you see that she's frail, but you see that she has this conviction and courage that burns hotter than anything. And she just has this brilliant desire to show that fishmen can live above the surface of the sea, live with humans, that they can let bygones be bygones and live in peace. Again, to touch the sun, just like the Sun Pirates, kinda. Jinbei and Arlong, we see that they kind of butt heads, they're kind of at odds, but they're under the same umbrella. Jinbei is faithful to Otohime, Arlong is not really down with what she's doing. We also learn that Fishman Island, or the Fishman District in Fishman Island, started as an orphanage. It fell into lawlessness, and then Fisher Tiger took control. And eventually, through the exploits we know of, Fisher Tiger would become the most notorious pirate in the world through freeing the slaves at Marijoa. So the government went after Fisher Tiger, but then the Fishman pirates banded around him and defended him for what he did, and this led to the creation of the Sun Pirates. So this is a precursor to what we were talking about, the creation of the Sun Pirates, to mask that and mask the slaves and just have this symbol of unity and freedom. And then, from then on, there was this constant fighting with the government, with the Marines. They would fend them off, and we see Jinbei slowly becoming hardened and more cynical. And that makes sense, because in the present, he's so wise and learned and flexible and idealistic. His focus on miracles, remember? That's one of the first things we hear from him. But to become that way, it's very difficult. Like, you would imagine that someone who becomes that way has experienced the opposite. It's not easy to just be born into that sort of thing without experiencing something contrasting to that and learning from it. So it makes sense that Jinbei is this way in the past. So the Sun Pirates slowly gain more and more notoriety, they gain more influence, kids in the street would worship them, and as a result, unfortunately, hatred grows towards the humans. But notably, Fisher Tiger says in the midst of all of this that he fights for liberty, not for hatred. He says that no matter what they do, they cannot cross the line and kill, because that would perpetuate this cycle and continue it. So Fisher Tiger is very apt, very intelligent, very astute, and understands the situation better than anyone else, it seems like, or as good as anyone else. There are very few who have a grasp of the situation as well as he does. And he speaks with Jinbei, and he says that he admires Otohime's dream, but he fears a monster inside of him. And we know this monster to be hatred, to be rage at the humans for what they did to him and his people. He fears that he may not be able to forgive them, and unfortunately, at the end, he is consumed by that monster. But he doesn't, the key is, he hates that. He hates that it got a hold of him. He hates that it controlled him, and what he wants more than anything is for the younger generation to not be controlled by that hatred in the way that monster controlled him. That is what he wants. He wants a prosperous future, even if he can't bring himself to buy into the things that need to be bought into now to lead to it. There's such a human element to that. We'll get into it later, but I love that element of Fisher Tiger is beautifully done. Beautifully done, very raw, very genuine. They then meet this former slave girl, a human named Koala, and she is very sort of submissive and doing whatever she can do in order to survive. And it's very sad to see the treatment that she expects from them. And Fisher Tiger says, you know what, we'll bring you back home. And she cries at his words of encouragement after he strikes her. Of course, that's definitely worth noting. But he tries to encourage her, and she cries just from sheer emotion and maybe unexpected emotion at the sentiment of what he says. Now, the Sun Pirates reach Koala's hometown, but it was an ambush. Ambushed by the Marines to try to capture and kill them. And throughout this whole thing, he manages to escape. He makes his way back onto the ship, but he's gravely wounded. And what happens is he needs a blood transfusion from people with the same blood type so that he'll be able to survive. He dies there because he does not want human blood in him. He cannot bring himself to love, to forgive, let alone love humans, and he doesn't want their essence within him because the hatred is so deeply ingrained that he can physically not bring himself to take it. He would rather die than have that inside him. And he hates it. You can see by his expressions, he has tears in his eyes, he's horrified at himself. But he cannot bring himself to do it. That is what this world, this culture has wrought within him, and that is what he doesn't want for the future of the children. He was a former slave, his hatred is too strong, he cannot bring himself to be the bigger person. And it's cruel, it's unfair. How can you expect him to have to do that, given what he's experienced? But that's what's necessary. And he knows it, but he can't do it, and it kills him. He was damaged beyond belief, and he hated what he felt, but he couldn't change the fact that he felt it. He tried so hard, but he had this poison within him that ultimately took his life. I think for some people, it would be really hard to understand the contradictory nature of Fisher Tiger's ideals and what he stands for, and yet what he did. It's a little bit hard to wrap your head around if you don't put yourself in his perspective and really, really try to empathize. But I think it's so organically and beautifully done, and I think it makes him one of the most powerful, flashback-specific characters in the entire story. He's a great foil to Otohime, he's so real. And in response to his death, Arlong is infuriated and goes to Koala's hometown to try to get revenge, but there he's captured by Admiral Borsalino, who is Kizaru. Vice Admiral back then, sorry. It's an extremely dark chapter, one of the darkest chapters in the entire story so far, but I love, there's a line there as Koala's taking them to their village where it said that the humans only fear the fishmen because they don't know them. That's all. And it's heartwarming in the moment, but also deeply sad knowing what that leads to, or what becomes of that relationship. So in response to all this, Jinbei gets his offer to become a warlord, after which he's able to pardon all the Sun Pirates, including Arlong, which is the precursor to leading Arlong into Arlong Park to setting him free. And Arlong, despite being freed, is infuriated at Jinbei for bowing in his mind to the humans, for agreeing with them, for not fighting them with all that he's got. Arlong is a slave to his hatred, just as Fisher Tiger wouldn't have wanted, whereas Jinbei learns and goes in the other direction. But what he does here would lead to horrific side effects that he admits that he doesn't expect to be forgiven for and accepts any punishment, any consequence. But it really deepens Arlong. I really love what this does for Arlong, and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes me want to go back and reread Arlong Park, to be honest. But meanwhile, as this is happening, people are signing petitions for Queen Otohime for this reverie and this agreement with the humans, but in the wake of what's gone on, a lot of them retract their signatures, and it's heartbreaking. And you see Otohime tries to put on this brave, happy face, but she just can't take it. On her own, she lets loose this drunken rant, and she announces to everyone that she wants everyone to let bygones be bygones and just stop being stupid, essentially, in her very raw, rough around the edges rant, and just move forward. But at the end of this chapter, which is 624, we hear that a world noble has shipwrecked on the island, and it's a celestial dragon. Queen Otohime goes to try to help them, but as celestial dragons are wont to do, They cause a ruckus. They rile up a lot of people. They say it's their duty, their honor to help them. They're very racist. They're very condescending. And someone tries to shoot this celestial dragon, but in the nick of time, Queen Otohime gets in the way. And what she says is unbelievable. You have to be the bigger person here. You have to do completely unfair things for the sake of progressing forward and for the sake of reaching that sun. So that's what she does here. She takes the bullet for this person who wouldn't spare a thought for her, who would treat her like dirt. But she does it nonetheless, because the children who are watching must not ingrain hatred in them. This future generation must look at this situation with hope for the sake of a better tomorrow. It's so admirable. It's so just compassionate. And it kind of connects with what Fisher Tiger, what his sentiment was. He couldn't change. Maybe their generation is done for, but the next generation, the children, they can be molded in this way. Now, Hodi's one of the onlookers who wishes for him to die, the Celestial Dragon, but Shirahoshi, a young 6-year-old Shirahoshi, comes forward crying and shows that she possesses this power to bring forth Sea Kings, to summon Sea Kings, and seeing this legendary power is what causes Vanderdecken to have this interest in marrying her. Now, the World Noble, the Celestial Dragon, is healed, and Otohime goes with him to the surface to discuss with some officials her ambitions. And I had a bad feeling about this, but she returns with a document, a really important document. And it seems the talks have gone pretty well, because that document legitimizes the friendship between Fishman and humans. And with signatures, she will be able to bring these petitions to the Reverie, so she needs them here, to make this official, to make this friendship official and carry out her dream. And people flock to it, people have this hope, and it makes her cry. And it's beautiful. And she explains to her sons as well of Shirahoshi's power, and says, this is sacred, this has to be protected. And they ingrain that, and they very much are motivated to do so. However, later when she's collecting signatures, it's set on fire, and she's immediately shot, and she suffers a fatal wound, and she's assassinated, and her children rush to her, and the first thing she says is, don't hate them, don't hate the person who did this, we have to be better. We have to be better than them, we have to be way better than them. And she doesn't say that, I'm saying that. She's too benevolent and compassionate and kind and too much of an angel to phrase it like that, but I'm saying it. They are forced to be better, despite having all the reasoning in the world to be as bad as them. But that's what has to be done, and that's what she says to her children. Do not hate for the sake of their people. You can't do that. And Shirahoshi, she begins freaking out, she begins losing it in grief, but her brothers, with tears in their eyes, they had this quirk early on where they would dance and sing, and we see this is, they're using it here to try to comfort Shirahoshi, to tell her it'll all be alright. But they're mad with grief, they're tears streaming down their eyes, their faces, it's horrifying to see. But again, so admirable from them. And they promise that they'll get the signatures again. They promise that they'll reach the sun. And Otohime says the real sun will shine on us again. And I really think it's going to be Luffy. It was Luffy in this arc, but I really think it'll continue to be. I think Luffy will lead them to the real sun. Now, what seems to be the case is that the assassin ended up being a human, as said by Hody Jones. Though we know that isn't the case at all. He's controlling the narrative, and he shot the shot himself, which is it's something that I kind of suspected from the start, but, you know, I don't think Oda is trying to be super unpredictable here. I think every step matters for the overall narrative with regards to the perspective of Fishman Island, and how things progress from there. So, yeah, Hody says that it was a human who did it, trying to rile up the hatred, the opposite of what Otohime wants. Now, Neptune, with maybe my favorite stuff from him, knowing what his wife would have wanted, he is so full of hatred himself, and he wants to take it out on those responsible. But to honor her wishes, he locks himself in a tower. Maybe it might be the same tower that Shirahoshi was in, I'm not sure exactly, but he locks himself in because he doesn't trust himself to honor her wishes and memory because of how strongly he feels for her. Such a great moment, and I love that. And at the funeral, there is this beautiful, beautiful speech from Fukaboshi. He says to not give up on hope, that they will reach the sun one day. And they should all strive for it. Now, that sentiment is difficult to hold on to years and years going forward, 10 years prior, right? But I do think, to some extent, it's held strong in those who matter most, and that's all that's really needed before Luffy was to come along here, Luffy and the crew. And after hearing all this, the flashback is over, one of the best in the series, like I said, and like I alluded to earlier, Nami forgives Jinbei, being the bigger person, doing exactly what is necessary to break this cycle of hatred. And he is so grateful. There are tears streaming down his face. He just can't express enough how much he appreciates that she forgives him, because he was willing to do anything for that. He realizes the extent to which he caused her pain. Now, there's a lot to unpack here in the story, and most of it I've already talked about, but there's some lingering things. Firstly, the matter of inherited will. Fisher Tiger's will, or inherent will that he couldn't control, was his hatred for humans that he did not want passed down. That nonetheless kind of got passed down, so there's a tragic element to the inherited will there. Cool subversion, I guess. Now, all this stuff also, as people in my chat said, helps recontextualize Jinbei's decision to become a warlord. He tried to work within the system, as Otohime tried to sort of honor her memory, and that's something I find very, very beautiful. But at some point, Marineford specifically, before Impel Down, I guess, it just became too much for him to bear, too corrupt. He couldn't deal with it any longer, and he couldn't work within those confines to gain sovereignty for his for his nation, for his island. And so he decided a different way. But I like how this sort of adds an extra layer to his decision there and deepens his character as a whole. Now, there's one detail here, which is, throughout this whole story, Luffy's sleeping. And he's been known to do this before. We've talked about it before. Now, I know who Luffy is. I know that he already had a judgment. His snap judgment was to help these people. He knew that they were good people, they'd gone through a lot, and he wanted to help them, and that's all great, and then the backstory wouldn't change his mind. That's all fine, and he's done that in the past, and I think it works a lot of the time in the past, but here I can't help but find it a little bit unlikable. Here, Jinbei's pouring his heart out, talking about the history of this place that Luffy is going to save, and Luffy's going to save it no matter what, and he's made that decision. I get it, but to me it's strange that Luffy just doesn't care about the oppression, the specifics of the oppression, what Jinbei's gone through, what this island has gone through, what's led to Nami suffering, all this stuff. This is deeply, deeply important to understand and empathize or at least sympathize with these people. And it strikes me as strange that Luffy slept through it. He didn't sleep through Boa's stuff, and of course that was to gain information he didn't have prior. But I don't know, to me, it doesn't feel right to me that Luffy was not interested at all. He was dozing off during this story of oppression and tragedy. I don't really like that. And to an extent, while sleeping during backstories is very key to Luffy's character, I actually consider the lack of wanting to understand and hear the specifics here, despite I acknowledge that he is a character who makes his mind up, makes judgments, and works off of that. Despite that, I still think this is actually kind of out of character. It's mean-spirited to an extent for me, and I don't really like that in Luffy. But it's very minor, not a huge flaw or anything. Just thought I'd point it out, because I remember reading that and just it didn't fit right for me. Let me know what you guys think. But at the end of this, Hody proclaims to the world, breaking this news across all of Fishman Island on a TV, projecting himself everywhere. And he proclaims that he's the new king of Fishman Island. He shows everyone that Neptune is captured. He says that all humans must perish, that they will grind them into the dirt, and anyone sympathizing with them will be captured, or banished, rather. And he also says that he's going to execute Neptune in the plaza. And he has this box of the signatures that they tried to collect in Otohime's name. Anyone on those names will be executed. So he is just going scorched earth. It is quite incredible, in a horrifying way. He is so full of hatred, and he leaves a message for the Straw Hats saying that he has Zoro, Usopp, and Brook, and that he'll execute all of them. Now, he doesn't really know who he's dealing with, so there's not a real risk there, there's no real fear for the reader there, but nonetheless, it's a demonstration of how much of a shackle this hatred is. And Hachi and Jinbei say here that no one hates humans as much as Hody. It is impossible, and it really demonstrates that he is like we've talked about before, the concept of his character, he's a byproduct and a result and a reaction, more than a person, and he's a tragedy as such. Luffy decides that he wants to go and save the Straw Hats, of course, but Jinbei stops him, saying what I kind of explained before. If he goes to fight, it'll perpetuate and continue this tension between humans and fishmen. And his desire for this is so fervent that he's ready to fight Luffy for it. And meanwhile, we cut to Robin, who is at a poneglyph, and she says, Joy Boy. This is where we first hear about Joy Boy. Joy Boy apologizing for a broken promise. We've already talked about that, but this is where we hear it first. So Luffy and Jinbei are fighting here because Luffy wants to get to Hody and defeat him. Jinbei standing his ground as well, which is, by the way, the sort of thing a Straw Hat needs to do that Luffy respects even if he may disagree. Very Usopp in that way, kind of, in a way. And then Robin appears out of nowhere after her poneglyph excursion and says, stop fighting, aren't you guys supposed to be on the same team? It throws everyone off, and there's a funny Sanji gag, because she gets in the middle of those two, and Sanji goes, oh, Robin's in danger, and he runs to them, and he gets in the middle of them, and he gets punched by both of them, and it was pretty funny. I got a kick out of that. So Jinbei explains his position, and Luffy and Sanji say, nonetheless, we gotta save our friends, they're in grave danger. Bit of an allusion to, they just got back together again. Luffy it was 2 years ago, but one of his last interactions with the rest of the crew was him losing them. He doesn't want that to happen again, so he's gonna save them, of course. Now, meanwhile, people start traveling to the plaza, while the three said to be executed are wondering what they should do. We see a bit of Brooks's ability, where he is able to sort of let his soul leave his body, which kind of explains and expands upon some of the metaphysics that was introducing Thriller Bark, which was pretty cool. But yeah, he has this ability to leave his body, and he's like, it's great, I can move. But they're like, that doesn't solve a damn thing for anyone except you, and even your physical body is stuck here. So it doesn't do too much. But as people are traveling, quarrels and fights begin to ensue, and Fishman pirates versus citizens. Hody Jones takes the energy steroids again, and it ends up being too much, and he ends up overdosing. And there is this ominous, horrifying tone over it all. Neptune's royal army is defeated through all of this, and the place is barred off so that the execution can occur. And Hody, after overdosing, he transforms. He becomes this true to his name, a great white shark Fishman, this gigantic, monstrous thing, becomes very pale, very white, very powerful, kind of the embodiment of rage, the personification of rage. The princes are obviously trying to stop this and save their father. Everyone else is trying to rush to the plaza as well. They've got some sort of plan going on. So after all this, the sons, Fukaboshi and his brothers, are defeated, and they're put up for execution with Neptune. Jinbei confronts Hody, and he... the history between these two, there is quite a bit, and he acts quite disappointed and saddened, but not really surprised, which I think is telling. Hody has this army of 100,000 soldiers. I believe it was 70k fishmen, 30k human slaves, and he's going to use it to his disposal, like they're at his disposal. And it's looking quite devastating, but here is where Charlie comes into play and her prediction. She's in the crowd and she says that this will not go down because, as per her prediction, her fortune, Luffy will destroy this. And at this point, destruction of Fishman Island seems like a good thing. It seems like an escape. Now, Hody, who is told this, is very upset by this, and he shoots Charlie. And it's not fatal, she's okay, but she's injured. And he mentions that Arlong is her brother, and he had the right of it. And he is acting kind of in his stead, misinterpreting some things like we mentioned. But it's cool, Charlie is Arlong's brother. Really cool layer added that... It makes sense that it was only mentioned now, deep into the arc, because why was it relevant before? There was no natural situation for it. So, a cool little connection there. He then addresses the crowd and says that he was the one who shot Queen Otohime. Something like that, like I said, was not super out of the question. It wasn't super surprising. But what is interesting is that Shida Hoshi says that she knew. She had been told by Megalo, and she didn't want to pursue it because it would then just, again, perpetuate the cycle. She promised not to hate. She told her mother that. And, I've seen some say that this was foolish or stupid or naive. One, she's a young girl. She is 16 at this point, and when she found out she was much younger. So, I think it makes plenty of sense that this is the way she thought. And there's also a great deal of logic and wisdom to it, inspired by Otohime. In this case, the solution is very heart over reason, like a lot of One Piece. And this has heart, but it isn't lacking, it isn't bereft of reason. So it makes sense, it's organic. I get it, I like it. Meanwhile, Vanderdecken throws the Noah towards Fishman Island. Now, Hody is about to execute King Neptune, but then Luffy comes out of nowhere and stops him. The Sunny comes and just blasts and causes all this wreckage, and him and the crew make their entrance, the heaven-sent boy once again. And the island civilians, the people here, ask Luffy if he's a friend or foe, or if he's a hero, and he says that it's their call to make, their judgment. He's never claimed to be a hero himself. He is a hero to some, to many, to people in Skypiea, Alabasta, Drum Island. He is a hero to many people throughout the sea. But he's also a villain to some. He's a villain to some people in the world government for what he did in Impel Down. And he is aware. I think there's a wisdom here. He says, I am what I am. Make your own judgments. But I will not stop on my charted course. And the rest of the crew are there. They're ready to engage. They're there with Jinbei. It's an amazing spread, an amazing moment. And this chapter, in general, is really, really good. It reminds me a lot of Skypiea. Remember in Skypiea how people are just crying and praying for Luffy to succeed and ring the bell and to beat NL. Just people all across Skypiea are just praying, crying for this. Very similar to what happens here. There are people all across Fishman Island who are chanting Luffy's name and begging him, Fukaboshi, I believe, begs him, just destroy this place. Pull it up from the roots ideologically. Get rid of the old horrible ways and start anew. Fulfill the vision of Charlie metaphorically, and they can pick themselves up and move forward. And as always, he takes up that burden because of the person he is. And also there are some cool Sanji Jinbei moments as they kind of team up in instances, which I thought was really cool. A reconciliation after their earlier confrontation. Now, we do a little bit of a flashback where Jinbei explains to Luffy the tactics for taking down Hody, the sort of compromise they came up with, and he said that he can become the hero of Fishman Island, and Luffy says here, pirates are not heroes, kind of going off of what he said earlier. And that's resulted in this. Shirahoshi kind of apologizes for keeping this secret from Jinbei, from everyone, of the true identity of her mother's killer. And Jinbei says, which I think, from one of the most wise characters in the series, this kind of justifies in and of itself Shirahoshi's decision here. He encourages her. He said she's been, protecting the bud of hope for years and years and years. And now it's their turn to help her. She had inherited it from her mother, and she had been protecting it through her ideals. And now it's their turn to help. Hody brings forth his army and his soldiers, and they confront Luffy, and Luffy takes out half of them with his haki. Hody says that he is going to be the new king of the pirates. Luffy says there's only room for one of them. Fantastic spread, fantastic moment. I couldn't really believe what he had done there, but super impressive. And from here on, there's a lot of great bombastic Straw Hat action. Each member gets some really fun interactions and some awesome battle panels, and they get to show off how they've grown. It's just great to see them in action once again. All of them have smiles, just like old times. All of them contribute. Hody brings forth Tsurume, who he thinks is his pet, but little does he know that Luffy has tamed him, and thematically it's pretty potent too, because Luffy tames him with the spirit of connection, something that Hody, it's completely foreign to him. So Tsurume betrays them and ends up protecting Luffy, the Straw Hats, Shirahoshi. The fighting continues. Frankie is taking on this guy named Daruma, and he uses a new weapon he's created. And what didn't really strike me at first, but what was told to me, is that the weapon he uses, the General Frankie, it is Battle Frankie 38. His post-time skip body was Battle Frankie 37, and his body became Battle Frankie 36 after the trauma of his backstory that we learned about in Water 7 Enies Lobby. So this is the first weapon that Frankie's created since then, since what happened with Tom. He swore never to make a weapon again after what he had done, and you could maybe say that his body was a necessity, but this in itself is him making that weapon, making his creations, and showing that he has overcome that trauma, and he trusts in himself in the way that Tom told him to. So great little character moment there. There's also a great moment, very reminiscent of Shanks, as his crewmates clear the way for him. Luffy just walks forward towards Hody with this aura around him. It reminded me a lot of Shanks when he went to confront Whitebeard. And elsewhere, we see that the arc, Noah is moving because of what we said with Vanderdecken. And Neptune says that the arc cannot be moved, it cannot be doing this because it is not the promised day yet. The day promised by Joy Boy to lead them into the sun, I imagine. That's, again, my theory, but it makes sense. Using his haki, Luffy is fighting Hody. It's a back and forth. He seems to be overpowering him, but Hody doesn't get completely overpowered. Now, Dekken on top of the Noah is being attracted towards Fishman Island because it's going towards Shirahoshi, and Shirahoshi tries to draw it away. Very compassionate to her people. Reminded me a little bit of Vivi in that way. Maybe that's why I like her so much. But no, there's lots of other aspects to her character as well. But being the princess figure that she is, thinking of her people, great leader, as rough around the edges as she might be, what she lacks in experience she makes up for with conviction, and she asks Dekken to take her, not the island. Here, knowing what he has to do, Luffy sets off for the Noah. And there are some cool physic dynamics here, because Fishman Island is surrounded by a bubble, then there's little, like, sort of, another layer of air around it, and then another shielding. So Oda does some really cool elements of the Noah traversing these things than where the island is in the center of it all, and the mechanics of where Shirahoshi goes, where the Noah's going. It's generally pretty fun and creative. Sanji helps Luffy get towards the ship, though, to help with this. So there's a lot of difficulty happening as Shirahoshi is going all over the place, and Hody's plan isn't going as he intends it to go, and she's making it difficult with regards to Vanderdecken's powers. So ultimately, Hody makes a decision here, which is to go to Vanderdecken, stab him with his trident, wondering what happens if you die and your power just stops. His plan is for the Ark to crash down upon Fishman Island and destroy it all. So Vanderdecken's defeated. He's not dead, but he's very close to going unconscious. Hody then goes after Shirahoshi. Luffy defends her. Then back down on Fishman Island, the Straw Hats are doing their thing and fighting back the Fishman pirates. It's just generally really engaging, really good stuff. There's a great moment as Zoro protects Robin, and knowing their history and how Zoro didn't trust her all the way back when. I love it. I love him defending her there. It shows how far those two have come. Now, the princes, Shirahoshi's brothers, are helping her escape from Hody Jones along with Luffy, and Vanderdecken is very close to being unconscious, but he's still conscious, so she tries to keep running to get the ship away from Fishman Island, but he eventually succumbs and passes out. And ultimately, the Noah is going to crash on Fishman Island very soon. It is literally dropping from the sky. Now, Luffy wants to smash it, to destroy it so that its weight won't fall upon Fishman Island, but Fukaboshi had explained to him that the Noah is deeply important to them and their people, to Fishman Island. There was a promise by someone, a promise with a great man who I think is Joy Boy, that it will be necessary when the promised day comes. Again, far in the future, all that we've talked about. And Luffy understands that, but there comes a point where once it's right on top of Fishman Island, he's going to want to destroy it, and you'd have to for the sake of their lives. But that's a last resort. Luffy and Hody continue to fight, but then Fukaboshi contacts Luffy with the Den Den Mushi, and he says that he knows of Hody Jones's true nature. Earlier, he said that he would do anything to get his revenge on humans, and that is key. That is his true nature. He seems to exist just for that. Now, as the Noah is falling down, the citizens of Fishman Island, they need to evacuate. They need to get to as safe shelter as they can, as is possible. And Neptune is told to evacuate, but he says he's going to stay here and wait for his sons. And in the midst of the struggle, Jinbei asks Robin to use her power to free the human slaves. Again, great little tiny show of demonstration from Jinbei of the sort of ideals and the sort of way you would need to interact with the world to break this cycle. Straw Hats continue to fight. Each, again, continues to have their own time to shine. And Zoro, specifically, he has this great line where he says that, I think Hyozo he was fighting, and where he says that he isn't even worth killing time. I made the joke that when Oda's writing Zoro, he seems to just pick raw lines out of a hat, and he goes, okay, every couple of chapters, this is Zoro's new raw line, let's add it in there, and it's another one here. Robin ends up doing what Jinbei asked her, and she says that as she frees the slaves, she couldn't turn down a request from a handsome man. It should have been me! Hopefully you know the meme, otherwise I'll look like I'm deranged. Yeah, that was hot. I've never seen Robin act quite like that. I think it shows her growing confidence and a really cool, flirty, fun, friendly dynamic between her and Jinbei, which could be key for when he joins the crew. Either way, I love that moment. It was great. There's a great moment as Usopp says that he can now back up his big words. There's awesome nuance to his evolution while not betraying who he was. He doesn't get a ton this arc throughout, but it's a nice, gradual reintroduction to Usopp. Then we get back to Fukaboshi, who says that Hody Jones is a being who was created due to hatred. The hatred perpetuated of the Fishman people towards the humans. He would not exist in the way he is without this, and he is in fact existing because of it. Like we said before, he's hardly a person, he's just a byproduct, a force of nature, and that nature is this hatred that will swallow up and consume anything he can until he is satisfied. And I don't think he ever will be, due to his unrelenting nature of humans. He will not stop until every single human out there is dead. And Fukaboshi learned this of him when he asked him straight up, "What did humans ever do to you?" And he said, "Nothing." Hody Jones said humans have never done anything wrong to him personally, but he has been born and bred in this environment of hatred, and it's molded him. He's not to say that he has no agency or he can't be blamed for what he's done, but he never had any other option, really. He's a horrible person, but he's a horrible person who really became the way he became for reasons out of his control. And I don't find that sympathetic, to be clear. I'm not saying that anything Hody Jones did is justifiable. He obviously is a very hurt soul who is morphed into something almost robotic, mechanical. No humanity in there. Again, a force of nature. That is a sympathetic concept that I feel sorrow about, but I don't remove the blame from what he did. It's just a very interesting conflicting concept. From here we get a bit of context to what Fukaboshi has said, as we see a little bit of a flashback, as we get a sort of internalization into Hody's perspective as a kid. Hody grew up learning what the humans had done to them, and then learning that as a result, the humans were an inferior species deserving of punishment and hate. And to that end, thinking that is his purpose in life, his identity, and why he's put on this earth, or this planet, or whatever you want to say, he would do things to that end. He would commit all these sorts of crimes, he would be cruel, and think that it was the right thing to do. He killed Otohime and thought it was the right thing to do. The energy steroids, everything to this end. This is the defining moment of his life, and this is the apex, and he needs it to succeed. Because that is the one reason for his existence. It's very sad in that way. Without this, there is nothing. Hody's always been this way, and he couldn't be any other way. His existence is a tragedy because he has been so morphed by this that he, like I've said a bunch of times, sorry for repeating, but he isn't even a person. I can't stress that enough. He is a product, a reaction. And he is the thematic antithesis, because this entire arc is about not holding on to hatred and moving on, and how difficult that is, but how necessary it is. Hody is the exact type of person whose existence is ingrained in hatred entirely. Not only can he not move on from it, but he is hatred. It is the beginning and end of him. It's very smart. He's a hollow concept, and he should be, considering someone described it as the depravity of the concept he embodies. And, sorry, I think I might have mixed up when Fukaboshi gives this speech about Luffy having to destroy the old order. It's here, and it brings forth the idea of Charlie's prediction. Either way, he's like, we don't need the past, tear it up. And that is metaphorically destroying the past of Fishman Island, very much in the way that Charlie saw. And Luffy says, okay, no problem, we'll do it. And then Luffy catches up to Hody Jones, and this was amazing. He uses this thing called the Fire Fist Pistol Red Hawk. It's a fire attack. It's a reminder of Ace. It is him remembering how Ace has touched his life, imbuing his strength in him and using that to power him forward and showing that he's moved on from his trauma and the loss of Ace, but also in a way, spiritually, taking Ace with him on his journey. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. It's one of the best moments of this arc. Simultaneously, a show that Luffy has strengthened and moved on from his trauma, and is all the better for it and stronger for it as a person, but also, Ace is forever with him in this way. People don't truly die until they're forgotten, and as long as Luffy's alive, with this attack, even casting aside the idea of the memories, Ace is right here. He will never be forgotten. And Luffy keeps fighting, Hody keeps popping these pills. Eventually, he actually defeats Hody, and a lot of the citizens are touched by what Luffy's done. The other Straw Hats are finishing up their battles, and in this really lovely moment, we see that Chopper uses his Rumble Point, I forget what it's called, Monster Point, and he's finally... All the times he's used it before, it's been a last resort that he couldn't control. Now, he can maintain his sense of self within it, this monstrous form. And this is again an overcoming of something that used to be traumatic and desperate and difficult and full of pain. and overcoming it and being empowered by it, recontextualizing past trauma and horrors into something that you can use going into the future. It's a great encapsulation of Chopper's journey and how he's gotten stronger. And he says, I'm a monster. Like, he is a monster, so of course he can control this. It's a great example of how he's ingrained Luffy's lessons and Hiriluk's lessons, and it's a wonderful character moment. Chopper was quite good in Fishman Island. And the fights continue. Oda pulls out some Marineford stuff, specifically for chapter 646. Every Straw Hat, I believe, gets a spread. If not every single one, the vast majority of them. All of them, they're all badass, they're awesome, they're great character moments, there's great lines. This was like something out of Marineford, but just the best way of celebrating the Straw Hats being back together for this first arc. Now the fighting finishes, ultimately, and the Straw Hats are just kind of looking up, waiting for Luffy to come down. There's a sort of casual nature to it, as they expect him to come down, as he always does, and I think this is a great way of showing the strength of the Straw Hats, while it not being trivial. It was a challenge, but it was definitely one that they rose to quite handily. But I love their relaxed nature in this spread as they wait for Luffy. They're all the same people, but they are stronger, wiser, more experienced. Now the arc is coming down and Luffy is doing his best to stop it, and Neptune internally accepts here, okay, forget the promise, we need to survive, lives are more important than this promise. And I think that's pretty big for Neptune. That is the right decision, and very notable. But just as Luffy's about to destroy it, Shirahoshi tells him to stop because the Sea Kings, a bunch of Sea Kings, have come to stop the Neptune, or the Noah from falling down onto Fishman Island. And these Sea Kings are quite impressed by Luffy, and everyone down below, seeing that they've stopped the Noah, everyone celebrates. The Straw Hats, just the random citizens on Fishman Island, the royalty, and it's very classic. It's very classic One Piece and nostalgic in that way. Now, we get some really important dialogue for the Sea Kings and Shirahoshi and her role. They tell her that they've been waiting for a long time for her, that she's their queen, and that their purpose is to pull the arc. I think that connects something with the promise from Joy Boy, because they later say that Luffy could hear them. Something they said earlier, Luffy heard them. I think it was to tell him to stop. But normal people shouldn't be able to hear him, and they say only one human before has ever done that or heard them, and that was Goldie Roger, which is interesting. That's part of what made me think, are they generations of Joy Boy? But they don't. These Sea Kings didn't say that Joy Boy could hear them, so there's a bit of ambiguity there. I'm not sure if it completely works out, but I think that has something to connect with the overall prophecy and the promise of Joy Boy and reaching the sun and Luffy's role in it. It all connects somehow, I'm sure of it. Maybe. I don't know. Either way, it's all really cool stuff for Shirahoshi, the Sea Kings, the theorizing for Fishman Island in the future, and Luffy. Now, there's the classic arc action come down after this, and Chopper, after using his monster points, cannot move. He wants to administer treatment to the people who are injured, but he can't move, so Robin is carrying him. It's adorable. It's very cute, and Robin's kind of miming things as Chopper says them using his body. It is just the cutest thing. Hody Jones and Vanderdecken and their men are sort of apprehended, and Luffy and Shirahoshi come finally, and Luffy has lost a great amount of blood. Wouldn't you know it, he needs a transfusion. Chopper asks for one, and who is available but Jinbei? And we have a blood transfusion from a fishman to a human. These themes go full circle in togetherness and bridging those gaps and connecting, no matter what race, no matter where you come from, no matter what walk of life, breaking the cycle of hatred through demonstration. The exact inverse of what Fisher Tiger did, and yet I think he'd smile to see this scene, as Jinbei, in one of the most beautiful spreads in the whole series, allows his blood to be put in Luffy. It destroys the custom of not giving blood to humans through metaphorically destroying the past. And this seemed improbable a long time ago, but it happened. It is something that was improbable that, regardless, those who had hope in it were rewarded, just like a lot of One Piece, just like finding Skypiea, just like any of the crew's dreams that they hold dear in their hearts, that they strive for nonetheless. The existence of the One Piece, becoming a brave warrior, becoming the strongest swordsman, or this right here is the epitome of One Piece, but used in a much different complexion with the societal problems of Fishman Island, and done beautifully. It's just supreme natural integration from Oda. The road is difficult, treacherous, seemingly impossible, but you can do it. You can reach the sun. As long as it's still possible, you can do it. And it's all done right here. This is a healing moment, and when Luffy wakes up, he instantly asks Jinbei to join his crew, and I freaked out at this. I've been wanting this for ages, but unfortunately Jinbei immediately says, yes, but I gotta wait a little bit, we gotta do some stuff, we gotta take care of some business on Fishman Island, which makes sense, it's fine, but my need for instant gratification was definitely frustrated in this moment, but it's good writing, it makes sense, it's organic, and I can't wait for the day that Jinbei formally joins. But I also wondered here, Hody Jones, this person who lived with one singular purpose in life, who just had it taken from him, I wondered, now that he's captured, how does he even exist as a person? What does he do? Well, to jump ahead a little bit, Neptune imprisons them, and they're told in no uncertain terms that they have to pay back for all that they've done. And we see that essentially the abuse of the drug, the energy steroid, on their body has caused them to age incredibly. Hody Jones and his Fishman pirates have aged what looks like hundreds of years. They just cannot even function properly. They look like they're at death's door how much they've aged. And it's a great metaphorical reflection of them being stuck in these old ways, unable to move on given the new information. It's a reflection of their archaic mindset. Now, in contrast, we have an amazing spread, this double-page full illustration of this party, the classic crew party togetherness with all the people of Fishman Island, in a way that hits a little bit different given the themes of the arc. People of all walks of life, all races here, just getting together and partying and having a good time, and it's beautiful to see the crew doing this again. Now, off to the side, Robin asks Neptune about who Joy Boy was, and I was frothing at the mouth at this. And we learn that he lived 800 years ago, minimum, during the Century Void. Now, the Poneglyph was an apology for breaking an unknown promise, but someone will do it in Joy Boy's stead. We talked about this already. I think it's Luffy. And it involves the care of the Noah. We talked about that as well. Like a successor, like an inheritor of a will. We talked about this all before because I'm too impatient. Sorry about that, I'm just realizing this now, but this is the revelation for it. But then we ultimately learn that Shirahoshi, given the ability she's inherited, is a weapon, one of the 3 great weapons. Along with Pluton and Uranus, we've now heard of 2 out of 3. But this is the same level as Pluton, is Shirahoshi. Meanwhile, Caribou kidnaps Shirahoshi. The Straw Hats are able to immediately get her back as Luffy and Sanji and Zoro send something bestial through their observation hockey, and they dispatch of him pretty quickly. But through this, we also learn something that I'll be completely honest about it, people in stream know this as well, I was spoiled on this. After Ace, I don't know if I talked about this in videos, I don't remember, but after Ace died, I thought, because I saw powers of fire and powers of ice, Ace and Aokiji, and the first thing I thought was that they had to fight each other, because fire and ice, you know, it's classic. But with Ace dying to Akainu, I thought, okay, now, definitely, like, Akainu and Aokiji are gonna fight. Fire, magma even, versus ice. That just makes sense, and especially considering their roles in the world government and Aokiji's sort of feelings towards the world government and how he opposes Akainu, it just seemed to make sense that they would fight each other. Now, I theorized this on stream. Someone spoiled it for me, not on stream. They essentially spoiled in a very rude DM that that does happen. So I knew this was going to happen. But nonetheless, it's cool to see it here. And I didn't know it was dropped as like an off-screen fight. But nonetheless, it's very cool to think about. And Akainu was the victor. These two fought, ice versus fire, for days on end, which is foreshadowing to the island of Punk Hazard, but we'll get to that in the next video. And it's generally just cool to learn of these goings-on post-time skip. It's good to catch up with these things, because the world is so vast that I did miss a bunch of stuff and wanted to know what was going on. And we also learned that Blackbeard is a new emperor. Oh boy. And speaking of emperors, we hear from one of the ministers that Big Mom's payment is late, like they don't have enough for Big Mom's payment for the month. Now there's this character named Peckham's, a very interesting tiger-looking guy who is Big Mom's messenger, and he says, we need the candy, and Luffy walking by accidentally lets slip that he ate a bunch. There's also another guy there, Baron Tamago, who wears an egg and looks like an egg. And we cut to Fishman Island where we see Big Mom. I don't remember if it was right away or a bit later, maybe another chapter later, but there is this spread, this monstrous spread, where she looks horrifying. This terrifying smile, these gigantic eyes, this hulking figure. Big Mom is terrifying, and it's established that she has destroyed islands before for them not being able to pay their tribute. She gives them a call, she gives her men a call, and Luffy picks it up, and he says, straight up, I ate it all. And Luffy tries to negotiate other terms, but it doesn't really work out, and ultimately Big Mom agrees that she will shift her fury onto Luffy himself instead of Fishman Island, which is what he was going for, and was very benevolent of him. And Luffy right here, as Luffy does, straight up declares war on Big Mom. Straight up tells Big Mom, I'm going to defeat you, and then I'm going to make Fishman Island my territory, and he's going to rule it as he wants to, which is really cool, and kind of... The first thing I thought of was Whitebeard looking at Luffy with hope. In that way, Luffy is a potential successor of Whitebeard with regards to his role on Fishman Island, and also his role of taking them further into the future, towards the sun. So I love that moment, it's great, and it really establishes Big Mom as this very heinous figure. I have read a little bit of Punk Hazard, and it doesn't seem like she has much of a role in that arc, but nonetheless, I'm excited to see what they do, what Oda does with her character. And the name was dropped, Whole Cake Island. It seems like she'll be central to that arc. I'm just making a prediction. It's a very elementary prediction. Big Mom is someone who focuses a lot on sweets and food and cake and dessert. And we have a cook on our crew. We have a cook whose past has not fully been substantiated upon. So I think, I'm sure a lot of you guys thought this as well, but whenever we get to Whole Cake Island, whenever we get to Big Mom's arc, I guess, I think Sanji will play a huge role, and I think we might learn a lot about him during that arc. So, if so, I'm very excited for that. But there's this lovely scene as Jinbei is talking to Neptune about the idea that they don't want to be subservient to Big Mom anymore, and Neptune agrees, and he says he has a better idea for in case they lose Big Mom's flag, the flag he would like to have on his island, to be emblematic of his island, the Straw Hat flag. Now, Neptune is then immediately told that part of a gift will blow up when the box is opened. Part of a gift that was given to Luffy, which they freak out about, but then they're like, oh, the Straw Hats have it, it's fine. And then we learn that Luffy sent all this treasure, including that to Big Mom, to try to negotiate some sort of deal and let them off for the month. Oh shit. So off to the side, Caribou wakes up after being beat up. He sees the treasure that he had prior. I don't know if I mentioned that, but he had this treasure prior. Luffy got it back and then gave it to Peckham's. He sees Peckham's with it, he tries to beat up Peckham's, he gets dispatched as he always tends to do, so that's just an idea about the power scaling going on with Whole Cake Island. These people are fearsome. What's notable is that Caribou is displayed as fodder, but he has quite a hefty bounty, especially considering what we were dealing with before. Now, of course, bounties aren't used for direct power scaling, but nonetheless, the idea is interesting, and it shows how far the Straw Hats are progressing and how strong their opponents are, especially in comparison to the earlier stuff. Now, I love this. We then cut to the New World, where we see time skip Tashigi and Smoker. They dispatch of the leftovers of Hody Jones's army, and we see that lots of G5, which is their subsection, I guess, a lot of pretty devastating, pretty horrible things are done to pirates for the sake of gathering information. Now, they don't seem to be directly overseeing it, but they have let it run loose a little bit, so that is very interesting. Adds a bit of a dark tinge to Smoker and Tashigi, for at least, even if not directly doing it, overseeing this and not putting their foot down. But this indicates that they will have strong presence in the next arc, and it's about time. I'm so glad to see them back. And while Smoker was there at Marineford, like I said, I wish he had more focus, but Punk Hazard is the time. Hopefully, we've got some good Smoker focus from what I've read already. I hope for some more on Punk Hazard. In the final chapter of Fishman Island, the Straw Hats are about to sail off, and we have a conversation with Kami and Charlie, where Charlie kind of speculates about the nature of her prediction, and whether it came true, or whether it's to come, whether it was metaphorical. Regardless of what it is, she decides that she doesn't want to take fortunes again. But the ambiguity is interesting. It's a very interesting hook to keep in the back of our minds as we go forward. Too much points to it. I still think there's more to be done with regards to that fortune and the Joy Boy promise and the Ark and the Sun, and Charlie is never wrong. So that's what I think. As they're sitting off, Nami is introduced to the idea that they have new log poses for the new world, with 3 sort of pointers. Because there are so many different magnetic poles throughout the oceans, you gotta use the ones that are pointed to with 2 out of 3 of the compasses. Something along those lines. I'm probably butchering it, but that's the sentiment. There's a beautiful moment as Shirahoshi says goodbye to Luffy and says that she will not cry as much next time they meet, and that they'll see them again. And Luffy says, I'll hold you to that, I'll see you. And they set off, they head out. But Shirahoshi stops them one more time, and Luffy makes a promise to say that he will take them to the sun, to the surface, the next time they meet. It's all lining up. Joy Boy? I don't know, I'm telling you. And then they properly set off, and Luffy thinks back to Shanks, to Kobe, to Ace, to the adventure ahead and the promises before, and takes it all in. And he embraces the adventure with his crew, and everyone remembers why they're here in the first place, and they resolve themselves, and they go forth. And that's the end of Fishman Island. Like I've said, great arc. Very few problems with it at all. Thematically dense and rich and touching, and lots of sensitive subject matter that I think Oda tackles with great quality. Hody is a super creative, effective concept for a character. Fisher Tiger, awesome. Shirahoshi, awesome. Neptune, I like a lot. Fukaboshi, I like a lot. Great scenes throughout. Great art. Great stuff for Chopper, Nami, some Robin stuff. Luffy plays a great role. It just all fits together so beautifully, and like I said, it reminds me a lot of Skypiea. This is a 9 out of 10 for me. It has one of the best flashbacks. It's inspired theory crafting in me more than ever before, I think. The idea of the sun, the themes, how it's indicative of the series as a whole, and yet so self-contained as well and powerful in that way. This arc is fantastic, and I really don't know why it has a lot of detractors. It is great. It's a little bit different, yes, but if you take it for what it is and not what you expect it to be, maybe, there is so much there. And I can't wait to see how the prophecy and the promise and Joy Boy and Charlie's prediction and fortune is tackled later. Fantastic arc. Now, if we go into my favorite characters list, there's a bit of a shuffle. So for honorable mentions, we have Kalgara, Iceberg, Mary, Cricket, Kuma, Mr. Tubon Clay, Hiraluk, Doflamingo, Sengoku, Kobe, Dragon, Akainu, Shirahoshi, Hody Jones, Arlong, and Mihawk. A few new additions, we got rid of a couple, because the honorable mentions can't have like 25 characters in it. That's as it is, I'm probably extending it a bit more than it should be. I do predict that Doflamingo will very soon rise. I need an arc focused on Doflamingo. I need it injected into my veins, and when it is, I imagine he's going to shoot right up, and I'm really excited for that. But for now, just an honorable mention. Now, my top 25 is as follows. Rayleigh number 25, Roger 24, Aokiji 23, Frankie 22, Sir Crocodile 21, Sanji 20, Chopper number 19, great material for him this arc, Fisher Tiger number 18, the new edition, Blackbeard 17, Smoker 16, Wiper 15, Brook 14, Nolan 13, Buggy 12, Jinbei 11, bit of a rise for him, Ace 10, Vivi 9, Garp 8, Shanks 7, Nami 6, Zoro 5, Robin 4, Usopp 3, Luffy 2, and Whitebeard 1. Still hanging on to it. Luffy's inching closer and closer, but Whitebeard's still number 1. Anyways, that's what I got for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Please share your thoughts on this really unique, awesome arc. If you agree, disagree, this one in particular, I'd love to hear all sorts of thoughts. If you'd like early access to the next review, which will be of Punk Hazard, you can do so by joining my Patreon under the $5 tier. You'll be granted access to the next video right now if you want. Follow me on Twitch if you want to see me read through every One Piece chapter up until we get caught up. Right now, like I said, we're in the middle of Punk Hazard. You can join the Discord for all things One Piece, discussions about new chapters that are coming out, which I can't read, obviously, discussions about my streams, discussions about the series in general, other series, video games, TV shows, whatever. And if you'd like your comment to be entered into and read aloud during a future video, just use the hashtag AJPiece and it could be selected. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for sticking with me, and thank you for continuing to join me on this awesome journey. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I know I did. I can't wait for the next one, and I'll see you guys then. Take care of yourselves.